Welcome to the Inspired Evolution. And guys, it is such a treat to be here today. We are blessed with the presence of Dr. John Demartini. John, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you here again. For those tuning in to Dr. John Demartini for the first time, it's actually impossible that you're tuning into him for the first time, but I'm going to do just a quick little honor. Anyway, he is considered one of the world's leading authorities on human behavior and personal development. He's the founder of the Demartini Institute, which is a private research and education organization. The curriculum spans over 72 different courses. It covers multiple aspects of human development. There is so much brewing here. The way I like to describe you to my friends, family, cohort is you're one of the titans in this world of human behavior and personal psychology. So thank you so much for being here and gracing us with your presence today.
No, thank you for having me. I was looking forward to it.
So John, tell us, we did an episode not too long ago, and we were tuning into a really deep conversation around values. But I realized we never really understood, never really got the opportunity on me to peel back into where did all this come from for you? So what inspired you to sort of work on yourself, go on the journey of, what was your journey? How did you first come to behavioral psychology? Like what was the impetus for you to try and improve yourself?
Well, I was born with a speech impediment.
No way, you're a speaker. Okay, yep, go on.
No, but I had to wear or put strings and buttons in my mouth as a kid from about age 1.5 to about 4. And I had to go to speech pathologist because I had problems pronunciation using my mouth properly.
Wow.
I also had my arm and leg turned in, and so I had to wear braces till I was 4 also. And so I was kind of like the Forrest Gump kid.
Wow.
And when I got into first grade, when I finally got to school and got out of my braces, no matter what I did, I just didn't know how to read. I couldn't read. I couldn't spell and I couldn't read. I had dyslexia and other speech problems.
Right.
I had to wear a dunce cap, believe it or not. They had dunce caps in those days. And the teacher told my parents in my first grade class that I'm afraid your son is not going to be able to read. He's not going to be able to write properly. I don't think he's going to ever amount to anything, go very far, or be able to communicate.
Wow.
So I made it through elementary school by learning how to ask very smart kids questions. And I would make them feel better about themselves. But what did you learn? Tell me about that book you read. And I tried to get them to do it. And I guess some of them felt sorry for me and some of them befriended. And I made it through elementary school with asking questions, which I'm known for today, my skills of asking questions. And then my parents moved from Houston, Texas, where I was growing up, to Richmond, Texas, which is a small town. And we lived in the country in a low socioeconomic area. And there we did not have at the school, because I had to go 13 miles to school. The school we went through there, bus to, was not really the brightest kids. And I didn't have anybody to ask questions to, and I ended up failing. And I ended up dropping out of school. So I left home when I was 13, and I was a street kid. I lived in a car. I lived in people's homes. I lived in a park. I lived in a bowling alley. I lived in a restaurant, like a restaurant. I was kind of a street kid. At 14, I went off to California, hitchhiked to California, and was a street kid there. And kind of had a really adventurous life. There's quite a few adventures that are pretty cool. 15, I eventually made it to Hawaii because I took up surfing. I was good at balance on a surfboard, but Texas wasn't the surf capital, California was. So
yeah, of course.
And I went to Hawaii. So at 15, I moved to Hawaii. I lived under a bridge first, then a park bench. I just took my daughter to that park bench in November on my 65th birthday. And then I lived in a bathroom, then an abandoned car, and kept social climbing. Eventually, I got into an abandoned house that one day was gone when I got back, and then in a tent eventually. And I nearly died at 17 in that tent.
Wow.
And luckily, a lady found me there and helped me get back on my feet. I was unconscious for 3.5 days. And then I went to a health food store with her help to get some food in me. And from there was a guy there that said, man, you need to take a yoga class. This interesting character there. And I ended up going to a yoga class one night where a special guest speaker named Paul C. Bragg was there. Right. And this gentleman, in 1 hour, one night, one message, this one man really said something really profound to me. He said, we have a body, we have a mind, and we have a soul. The body must be directed by the mind must be guided by the soul in order to maximize who we are as a human being.
Love that.
And that we have to take command of what we think about, what we visualize, what we affirm, what we feel about, and how we act if we want to master our life and do something amazing with our life. Nobody ever talked to me like this. And that night, he took us through a guided imagery meditation, which I'd never done before. And that night I saw a real vision, was unexpectedly, a vision of me standing on a balcony in front of 1 million people, speaking. That picture is a painting today. That image that I had has now been turned into a painting, a famous painting that sits in my office. And that night I saw that somehow I was going to overcome my learning problems, and I was going to become a teacher, and I was going to go out. And I saw that night that I was going to do what this man did for others. And that night I wanted to be a teacher and travel the world and step foot in the world, around the world, and just learn and be smart enough to teach. That was the first night I ever thought I was going to be intelligent. And that really did change my life. And that night was the night I first made a determination that I was going to try to overcome my reading and learning problems and speaking problems. And that took me on a trajectory that was relentless. I eventually flew to California, hitchhiked back to Texas from Oahu. And there, my parents encouraged me to take a GED, a high school equivalency test, so I would eventually be able to get a decent job with a high school degree. Somehow, with what Paul Bragg, the teacher, said to me, because he told me every single day to overcome my learning problems is to say that I'm a genius and I apply my wisdom every day.
With affirmation.
I've never missed a day. I've said that every single day for 47 plus years.
Wow.
And I always say a genius is one who listens to their inner vision and follows and obeys their inner voice and lets the voice and the vision on the inside be louder than all opinions on the outside, so they master their lives. So I ended up going back to Texas, and amazingly, by guessing and saying that little affirmation, I passed my high school equivalency test. And then my parents suggested that since the waves are not up, why don't you take a college entrance exam? So I took this college entrance exam thinking I might do the same thing, and I guessed and I passed. It was really miraculous because I really couldn't read half the stuff that was on there. Just with the pencil and just with my intuition, just fill in stuff. Then I took my first college class. There were two of them, English and history, trying to go back to college. And first class I took in history, and I needed 75 to pass, and I got a 27. And when I saw the results outside the door, I didn't want to look at anybody. I just ran to my car and I cried. Because I thought, I guess it's true, I'll never be able to read, never be able to do this. And I drove home crying, and I curled up in a fetal position underneath this Bible stand in my mother's living room when I got there. And she came home from shopping and she saw me there and said, "Son, what happened? What's wrong?" She hadn't seen me cry in a long time. And I said, "Mom, I blew the test. I guess I don't have what it takes. I guess I'll never be able to read or write or communicate or never amount to anything, never go very far in life. I'm sorry, Mom." I apologized to her. And she said something that only a mother could say. She put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "Son, whether you become a great teacher, healer, and philosopher like you dream about and travel the world, whether you go back to ride giant waves in Hawaii like you've done, or you return to the streets and panhandle as a bum. I just want to let you know that your father and I are going to love you no matter what you do. When she said that, my hand went into a fist. I looked up and I saw a vision of me standing on that balcony. And I said to myself, I'm going to master this thing called reading and studying and learning. I'm going to master this thing called teaching, healing, and philosophy. And I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to travel whatever distance. I'm going to pay whatever price to give my service of love across this planet. I'm not going to let any human being, not even myself, stop me on this mission. I got up and I hugged my mom. I went into my bedroom, pardon me. I got a Funkin' Wagnall's dictionary out. And I went to the beginning of the dictionary and I made a decision I was going to memorize 30 words a day until my vocabulary was strong enough to be able to pass school. So I started with A, and all that stuff in the dictionary. And I learned how to pronounce it properly, spell it properly, use it in a sentence and a meaning. And my mom tested me on 30 words a day until my vocabulary was strong enough to pass school. But then I didn't stop. I just wanted to read. So I started living in the dictionary, living in encyclopedias. I read 8 complete sets of encyclopedias over the next couple of years. And I started passing and then excelling. And my mom, not even a year later, came to me and she said, son, what do you want for your birthday, for your 19th birthday, for Christmas? I was born on Thanksgiving Day. I said, Mom, I want the greatest teachings on the face of the earth by the greatest minds, the greatest philosophers and thinkers that have ever lived in every field. I want the greatest ideas ever born in the human spirit.
What a thing to ask for. I love it.
He said, you sure you don't want a t-shirt? I don't care about a damn t-shirt. I don't care about clothes. I just want to fill my mind and learn. So she didn't know what to do, but she contacted her brother, who was a professor at MIT. And he was Uncle Ralph, we called him. And he sent to our house on a big flatbed truck 2 6x6x6 wooden crates with thousands of books in it as a gift. And I remember they loaded them on the ground, and I went out with a crowbar and opened them up and just kept carrying stacks of books into my room and organized my room into this sort of virtual library, this stacked book library, and have this little yoga mat in the center. And I was where I could do the window and have a sun salute. And I sat and I read 18 to 20 hours a day. The only time I wasn't reading is when I was driving. I usually read on the way to school, driving in between a steering wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And I just read 18 to 20 hours a day and meditated and fasted. And I just wanted to know the laws of the universe. I wanted to know how human beings ticked. And within a short period of time, I had a young woman come up to me and ask me to teach her yoga. After that, I had a young man who's from Persia asked me to teach him meditation because I was learning it. And then all of a sudden I had a guy come out and he said, can you give us some insight on some mathematics that you've been learning? And I had about 17 people gather around a round table. And that was the first real class that I presented. I was still 18. And I never stopped. I started teaching classes every day. When I went to the University of Houston after Wharton, I started teaching under the trees out in the park area in between the buildings. And sometimes 100 to 125, 150 people, sometimes it's 12 to 400 people would gather and ask questions under the park. When it would rain, we'd go into the cafeteria. And I had classes every day, cold or hot. And then when I went on to professional school, I gave classes every day still, each night. I get up at 2:30. I would start to read. By then I was speed reading, so I'd read 4 to 7 books on average a day. And then I would go jogging, come back, go to class. Sometimes I got to place out of the classes now, and I got to teach some of the classes. Others I had to take. And then I went to clinic, and then right at 7 o'clock, I was back at my apartment teaching classes every night till 10. And then back to bed at 10 and back up at 2. And I slept for 4 hours a day for 35 years. And I just devoured everything I could in every field, now 299 different disciplines, to try to understand and maximize the evolution of human consciousness and how to maximize human awareness and potential in human beings. And anything that allows a human being to perform at a peak level and do something extraordinary and amazing, inspiring in their life and live missionful and purposeful and truly inspired is what I'm up to. And since then, I have been on a relentless pursuit of that and traveling full time, as you know, until recently. And, I've traveled 20 million miles I've clocked on mileage now. And I've spoken in 154 countries. And I've done up to 426 speeches in a year and about 1,000 interviews a year. So I've been in relentless pursuit since.
You have not been idle, that's for sure. Thank you so much for sharing all that. There is so much that emerges out of that. And, I think one of the conversations that is most profound is your pursuit of the ologies, which is, 299 different areas to unpack and explore. And what's like, are you looking for, like you mentioned, peak performance is kind of the conversation that you're trying to dissect through there. What are some of the fundamental things that are the through line through everything that you've researched? Because you've read now, it's over 30,000 books. Like, wow.
Yeah, I've been relentless on that. I just finished reading again. I've read most all the Nobel Prize winners because I've been doing it. Most of the Western philosophers, Eastern mystics, anybody I get my hands on. And the most recent book I read again, I haven't read it in years, was Gilbert N. Lewis's book, The Atom and the Molecule. And in there, he talks about polarized and unpolarized states of chemistry.
Right.
And he talks about remnants and what is called a coercivity. And these are tendencies to polarize or depolarize chemical states. And the laws that govern that are identical to the laws that govern human behavior. And so I started to put together a book called Psychophysics, a textbook of psychophysics, and the relationship between physical principles and psychology. Because I wanted to make a hard science out of a pseudoscience, which is mostly out there in psychology, self-help, popular stuff out there.
Yeah.
So, for instance, because when we have a set of values in our life that are unique to us, whenever we live in alignment congruently with what we value most, and we're spontaneously inspired from within to act, and we're disciplined, reliable, we're focused, and we tend to walk our talk and expand our space and time horizons and build momentum and awaken our executive center and awaken an inspired vision and strategically plan that vision and execute that vision with self-governance. Whenever we do that, we reach a state of objectivity, and that objectivity state allows us to be literally soulful, state of unconditional loveful, with neutrality and non-polarization, depolarization. And but whenever we live by our lower values, because we've subordinated to other people, injected the values of outer authorities as a superego, we tend to go into our subcortical areas and our amygdala, which is a desire center to avoid pain and seek pleasure. And we tend to polarize our perceptions, seeking impulsively the pleasures of food, prey, consumption, and try to instinctively avoid the predators and threats. And we live in survival and polarize ourselves. And the things that we infatuate or resent, or the things we seek and avoid, the things we have impulses and instincts toward and away from, they occupy space and time in our mind and add time and space and age us entropically. Instead of, when we're living by our highest values, we literally extract out space and time from the mind, become present, and have a negentropic agelessness, timeless mind, agelessness. So the laws of physics and chemistry have a very direct correlation with psychology. The real psychology, not the pseudopsychology that's mostly taught to the masses out there. The opium of the masses that people want to hear and fantasize about instead of actually embrace and utilize for themselves.
So let's actually go there in terms of one of the things that you just flagged was there is a lot of, and there's so much in your story I want to go back to, but let's just go there. In terms of, there is a lot of opiate for the masses, and I think just let's unpack that a little bit, because one of the questions I've got is your values that for those tuning in, you're very clear. It's research, write, travel, teach, right? And I love that. But you could have learned many things. You could have researched many things, which you have, and you've written about many things. You've traveled to many places. But the teaching part, you could be teaching us, like you said, you could be teaching us maths. You could be teaching us meditation. Why is it so centered on personal development? Why is this like the focus for you?
That's a great question. Whenever one lives by their highest values, they embrace challenge in the pursuit of a mission. And they fill their day with challenges that inspire them to have fulfillment. Because when we live by our highest values, we have fulfillment. When we don't, we have sort of an emptiness. The Gnostics called it pleroma and kinoma. And whenever we do that, when we stop and look at the problems or challenges, the obstacles, that the questions, the mysteries, if you will, that we can face, there are what they call intrinsic values that relate to animated life forms in the first person, which is humans. And solving human problems is the greatest problems we can solve on the planet. So anything we can do to solve human challenges and problems and voids and help them fill those voids, help them solve those mysteries, solve those problems, answer those questions, is probably the highest pursuit the human being can do that gives the most fulfillment in life. So we could say that's a degree of enlightening ourselves about how to master our existence. You know, at the level of the essence of our soul, we have nothing missing in our life. At the level of the existence of our senses, things appear to be missing, and that's where our problems originate. So so anytime we can solve that, that's to our greatest advantage and the most fulfillment. Bill Gates, I think, has reached a level where he's comprehended that. In his creative capitalistic text with Buffett, he outlined that. But he asks a simple question that I think every human being could benefit on a daily basis. What is the greatest service I could provide that solves the greatest problems in humanity today with the resource I have in the most efficient, effective way that would inspire me? And it's a great question to ask yourself every day.
Question.
Yeah, because if you ask those type of concise questions, your life goes in a concise direction. The quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions you ask. And if you ask questions that bring equanimity to the mind and equilibrate the mind, where you're the most objective, you're most centered and neutral, you're least distracted. When we are highly infatuated with something impulsively, we fear its loss. And we fantasize about its gain. So we have a phobia for its loss and we have a philia for its gain. When we are highly resentful to something, we have a phobia of its gain and a philia of its loss. And so living in a highly polarized phobia-philia state is the most disempowered, because these phobias and philias, these infatuation resentments, occupy space and time in our mind and run us as brain noise and cause literally electrical and molecular imbalances in the brain, striving for neutrality. That's what ions are on a quest for neutrality mean. Questions in the brain. They're noise in the brain that are subconsciously stored that are imbalanced. The moment we ask quality questions, which are guided intuitively towards neutrality and objectivity, the executive center in our brain in the medial prefrontal cortex is illuminated with blood, glucose, and oxygen, where we maximally function in the most authentic manner and make the wisest actions, not the foolish decisions of polarization. A decision was always based on what we believe will give us the greatest advantage over disadvantage, but in objectivity, that's an illusion. We realize that everything we decide always has a pair of opposites, births a pair of opposites. But when we actually take an action out of love and inspiration, not out of a decision because of a polarization and a bias, and we transcend our biases and see things authentically, we actually have the most original ideas, the most awakened creative genius to solve the greatest problems on the planet. And it's almost like our physiology, psychology, sociology, and theology is constantly offering us feedback mechanisms to homeostate us, to guide us, almost like a panpsychic intelligence of the universe is wanting us to maximize our fullest potential on planet Earth.
Mm.
And so if we look and see things on the way and ask questions, how is whatever's happening, whether supportive or challenging, helping me fulfill my mission of service on the planet, then you realize that it's all on the way and there's something to be graced over, not disgraced about.
I love that. And so one of the questions that comes to me from that space is, we talk about your grounding in the conversation around love for us. And I think it's really potent. And one of the things that I want to address is and when we start talking about love, there is very much the opportunity for us to kind of feel like, oh, here we go again on positive psychology. And I know for just having followed you and, put you in the place of my mentor in so many ways, that you talk about the balanced mind rather than positive psychology. And there's, positive psychology may actually, in fact, appear to be like a lopsided stool with maybe not enough legs. Can you tell us a little bit about positive psychology versus having balance, and then still how love emanates through that from a balanced perspective?
What I call, Immanuel Kant said that there was an immanent and a transcendent self. One that dealt with phenomena of the senses and one that dealt with noumena, or what Plato would call the ideal forms of the soul. And scientists has now put that into neurological terms as the amygdala and the hindbrain areas and the forebrain executive center. So we put it into anatomical and kind of a neurological language today, but that's the same thing. Whenever we are in our immanent mind and we're in our amygdala, we seek support over challenge. We seek prey over predator. And we end up manifesting what we call false positives as a survival mechanism. In the wild, the animal had to deal with camouflage by both prey and predator. And so it emerged inside itself what they call patternicity, to be able to discern in the camouflage patterns that might be animated, and then to impose pareidolia, which is the facial expressions on them, to accentuate with false positives the potential that could be prey or predator. And it's better to err on the false positive and assume it's there when it's not, than to assume with false negatives that it's not there when
Of course.
So what happens when we're in our amygdala, that area of the brain accentuates subjective biases with false positives to accentuate a positive and a negative. And we polarize ourselves, like we do in chemistry, and literally bipolarize our emotions and our chemistries. We call it bipolar condition if it's extreme. As a result of it, we have this addiction to pleasure and this avoidance of pain, the addiction to pride and the avoidance of shame, externally and internally. And we become vulnerable to and gullible to those that sell the fantasy of the opium of the masses of pleasure without pain. But in fact, maximum development and achievement occurs at the border of those two. If you get prey without predator, you get gluttonous and you get fat and you don't get fit. If you get predator without prey, you starve and get emaciated and don't get fit. But if you put the two together, the predator keeps you eating just the right amount to keep you fit, but not too much. So it regulates itself, just like ghrelin and leptin inside the stomach on distension and emptiness is keeping the hormones balanced. When you're on living by your highest value, it balances the hormones. If not, the hypothalamus is thrown off by the amygdala. So we're vulnerable and we want the pleasure without the pain when we're not living by our highest values and inspired. When we're living by our highest values and really have something truly engaging and that we're totally inspiring that we want to do, we don't live to eat, we eat to live. We eat just the right amount to maximally perform because we're so engaged, we don't want to throw anything off and volatilize our blood sugar. But the second we're not engaged doing something that's really high in our values, we're in our amygdala and we tend to want to get pleasure without pain, and we want to consume, we want to eat, we want sexual reproduction, we want anything that's a dopamine fix. And this is why we have an addiction to positive thinking, because most people are uninspired by what they do, are not objective, not engaged, and they're looking for immediate gratification to compensate for it because their space and time horizons are shrunk. And Freud called that the idiot. The id is the impulsive, instinctual animal nature within us with a shrunken psyche, which iota means tiny shrunk. And the ego is more expanded. And so an individual that lives authentically according to their highest values expands naturally what their potential is, a human being, and builds momentum to achieve greatness. Now, in 1983, after 10 years of attempting to live by positive thinking, I read every self-help book I think that was out there at the time. And I decided I first noticed that the more I was trying to be positive, I noticed that I would run into people that I would react to and have negative thoughts, or I'd end up doing something that I'd have negative thoughts. And no matter what I was doing, I still couldn't stabilize and maintain this positivity. And then I thought, well, I need to go and get some mentorship. So I went to all the gurus. So I met Norman Vincent Peale, and I met W. Clement Stone, and I met the Earl Nightingale and his brother, and I met tremendous Charlie Jones, and I met Brian Tracy and Mark Victor Hansen and Jack Canfield. I mean, I've met all the people out there that in the things. Ed Tullison, Lou. I mean, I've met a lot of guys out there. And one thing that I realized is they were not positive either when I got to know them. They were just human beings that had positive times and negative times. And every time I would see that, I realized that I had both those, they had both of those. But I'm wondering, why is it that we're all being hypocritical? Why are we saying something to be one side when none of us are doing it? And I didn't like that hypocrisy. I wanted to study something that was true and figure out how this thing really worked. Because I just felt like I was becoming polarized, and I almost had to hide myself publicly from people knowing that I had the other side, because I was trying to promote one-sidedness back then. And then I decided at age 28 to do a research project. And what I did is I took 300 of the best-selling books that were available on the market. And I went through each page in each book, one page at a time, and circled every positive word in those books, and extracted them onto 3x5 index cards and stored them alphabetically in boxes as the words were emerging. And I came and extracted out of 300 books 2,000 of the most positive words in the English language.
Wow. And
I put them in alphabetical order. And then I sat and I meditated in these two boxes of these now positive words in the top left corner of the index card. I then meditated on each one, and I thought of the most positive statement, affirmation, or quotation that I could think of, including that word inside it. So this is the most positive word inside the most positive statement that I could conceive of.
Yeah.
And I compiled 2,000 of the most positive statements, affirmations, or quotations. And I wrote a book called 2,000 Quotes to the Wise. So if you go online right now and go to 2,000 Quotes to the Wise, Demartini, you'll see the actual book. It's still a book that I published. I sold about 75,000 copies of it back in '83. And then it published again a couple other times. Now, I put this book out, and I divided the 2,000 words into 365 days. There were 5 to 6 quotes per day. I put 4 days per page. So that means that there were 5 to 6 times 4, 20 to 24 affirmations per page. And it was a 93-page book, starting from January 1st to December 31st. If you go online, you'll see it. And then what I did is I decided I wanted to know once and for all what impact this has if I was to affirm these. So what I did is I created a chart called the day-by-day cycle forecasting form that had spiritual, mental, career, financial, family, social, and physical areas of life on the left column. And then across the page was 31 days. I divided each of the lines into days. I took each day and divided it into 4 sections: 7 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 7 o'clock. And I took each area and I put it as +3, +2, +1, 0, -1, -2, -3.
Metric it.
And then what I did is I got a clock, a little beeper clock from Target in my pocket. And I took this beeper and it would go off every 4 hours at 7, 11, 3, and 7. And then I would chant these quotations 108 times a day minimum. And I used these beads in my pocket to make sure I did them a minimum of 108, but I really did 600 to 1,000 affirmations a day on average.
Wow.
And what I did is I did these affirmations, the most positive statements, the most positive words, approximately 600 to 1,000 times a day. And every 4 hours, a beeper would go off, a clock would go off. And then I would ask myself, how am I performing in each of these areas right now at 7, 11, 3, and 7? And I did as honest evaluation as I could. Where was I? +2, -1, 0, +3, whatever it is, each time on all 7 areas every 4 hours. And then I kept records of that for 2 years, 24 pages, 24 months, I kept that record. I did the most diligent attempt to try to find out what positive thinking can do on physiology, psychology, performance, etc. as I could.
Beyond impressive.
I believe that I probably did the most in-depth effort at being a positive thinker of any human being on earth. In the pursuit of that, I then at the end of 2 years got a calculator out, a Texas Instrument one, and I ran all the numbers, the +1, +2, -1, +3, -2, 0. And I monitored the entire thing. And I calculated and totaled them all out in all 7 areas of life. And they came out 0, 0, 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0, 0, 0.1. It zeroed out. In other words, all the effort I had just created nothing but volatilities, but the total number of volatilities balanced each other out.
Wow.
And I learned then, I started studying the brain about homeostatic mechanisms and thermostatic and psychostatic systems and governing systems in the brain, which is what our executive center is trying to do. It's trying to get us into an equanimity state. And that was the end of my positive thinking. I was 30 years old and I said, done. And I was a little bit depressed because I'd spent 12 years of my life believing in it. And then that day, I was a quote by Paul Dirac, the Nobel Prize winner, who created particle nanoparticles. He said that it's not that we don't know so much, we know so much that isn't so. And we're taught so much that isn't so. And mostly in physiology, psychology, sociology, and theology is where the 4 opiums of the masses trying to teach you health without disease, happiness without sadness, harmony without disharmony, and heaven without hell. And those 4 opiums are sold to people designed to be ignorant as a controlling mechanism to set up hypocrisies and moralities that nobody can live by, so they self-depreciate and they're easier to control. Right. And I found that out studying this, the text and the council meetings in the early Catholic Church, why they did it. It's really quite interesting. And the political things by the Rockefellers, they talked about it. So in the process of doing it, I realized that I'm no longer going to pursue those delusions. I'm going to make a hard science out of that. And so I've made my effort to take physiology. I've written textbooks on physiology, psychology, sociology, and theology to try to make a hard science out of it. So people don't have to go off and live with anthropomorphic deities that are there to protect them from their fears and set up philias for phobias and set up fantasies for their nightmares and set up fantasies instead of true objectives, and then end up wondering why they're beating themselves up and not living inspired lives, and then wanting to be spectators instead of actually, contributors. So I don't promote one-sided thinking because I've not found it to be accurate, and it's misleading, and it gives people a temporary high and it leaves them with a crash.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It goes super deep. So, and I think it goes especially deep for those that, I've on the personal development journey, many people are, having these conversations with me in terms of, maybe I don't need to interface with challenges in order to grow. And maybe that's a myth, and I'm learning that. And I'm like, some of the biggest things that I've seen in life just through the journey of the inspired evolution, and to be honest, case in point in this conversation, John's story indicates, all the learning challenges, overcoming those, then becoming such a profound teacher. Our biggest challenges form our biggest gift is this continuous thread that I see again and again. But as you said, it's like an opiate to avoid the challenges, avoid the phobias. So one of the phobia for the, so one of the questions that I've got then is, all the work that you're doing seems to be pointing to helping us create this balanced perspective on our psychology, on our relationship with ourselves, our sociology. So from there, do you actually think there is an opportunity for us to rewrite the script of, obviously the biases that we have from an evolutionary standpoint? We actually have the opportunity to rewrite them, to have a different relationship with the world and each other.
Absolutely. The instincts and impulses in our animal nature are epigenetic responses from subjectively stored data that we picked up from conception till today. And the ones that were epigenetically passed down generation after generation. We know it goes back at least 5 generations, possibly 8 or more. So every time we perceive something and we are attracted to it and we are conscious of the upsides and unconscious of the downsides, we polarize our perceptions with bias. We have a confirmation bias of the upside, a disconfirmation bias of the downside, a false positive on the upside, a false negative on the downside. And we have a what they call a false reality. We hallucinate. Scientific American has a beautiful article in September edition last year, 2019, on the hallucinations that most people live by, and they don't even realize they're doing it. Biases. We have false attribution bias, confirmation bias, many different biases. There's over 700 different biases that people are subtly living with
every day.
And then we also have the resentments, things that would challenge our values, right? That predator-like, that we are now conscious of the downsides, unconscious of the upsides. And again, having a subjective bias, confirmation bias on the negatives and a disconfirmation bias on the positives, and a false positives on the negatives and a false negative on the positives on this one. And this polarity of perception skews our reality, and we have uncertainty. If I went to you and I said, you're always up, you're never down, you're always positive, never negative, you're always kind, you're never cruel, you're always nice, you're never mean, you're always peaceful, never wrathful, you're always generous, never stingy, always giving, never taking, always considerate, never inconsiderate. If I said that about you and I'm enamored with you, your own bullshit meter would go off and go, your bullshit meter would go off intuitively and say, not always.
Yeah.
You think the times you've been an asshole, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, totally.
I went to you and I said, you're always mean, you're never nice, you're always cruel, you're never kind, you're always wrathful, never peaceful, always negative, never positive, always inconsiderate, never considerate, always stingy, never generous, always taking, never giving. You immediately would have your bullshit meter go off and think, no, I have times that I'm a good guy, right? I'm a nice guy.
Yeah.
So you would have your intuition whispering to you on, that's bullshit, that's not true. So if I have a perception about you that's polarized, you have a knowing that's bullshit. But if I said to you, sometimes you're nice, sometimes you're mean, sometimes you're kind, sometimes you're cruel, sometimes you're positive, sometimes you're negative, sometimes you're generous, sometimes you're stingy, sometimes you're giving, sometimes you're taking, sometimes you're considerate, sometimes you're inconsiderate, sometimes you're peaceful, sometimes you're wrathful, you would immediately go, that's true. You would have certainty. A human being can never have certainty unless they have objectivity, until they see both sides. They're designed to have uncertainty, to waver them, to wobble them, like a top precessing with black and white, if it's spinning, instead of one that's standing steady when it sees both sides synchronously. And a person that doesn't have bias, but has true objectivity and sees both sides, they're steady, they're certain, they're clear, they know instead of unknowing. And therefore we have a yearning to want to know what we don't know. So we have a built-in mechanism inside our brain to try to get that objectivity, which is what occurs if we live by our highest value and only our highest value, where we're inspired. Inspiration is a confirmation we're living authentically.
I love that.
Now, the moment we do, we have a natural calling to pursue challenges that inspire us. Why? Because I used to do a presentation, teach a class called Awakening Your Genius. And I wanted to know, I studied every friggin' genius I was able to get my hands on that were polymaths that made major contributions on the planet. And I wanted to know what was common to them. And I found consistent reference to perseverance. They persisted. They never stopped. I saw them not worrying about what other people thought. They did it because they loved doing it. And they didn't want to get the opinions of others interfering with it.
They're inspired.
And I saw that it was a challenge that meant something deeply meaning in their own voids in their life. And I realized that if a person pursues challenges that inspire them, they wake up their greatest genius, innovation, creativity, and they make the greatest difference because of that originality. I've said since I was in my 20s that I create original work that serves humanity. That's been an affirmation since my 20s. Now, what's interesting is every time you are infatuated with somebody or resentful to somebody and have these biases and put them on pedestals or pits, whenever you put somebody on a pedestal, infatuate, you minimize yourself in compensation. And whenever you put people in the pit, you exaggerate yourself. And when you minimize or exaggerate yourself in shame or pride, you're not being yourself. So the moment you judge, you're inauthentic. and you're creating polarization and uncertainties. And that's a symptom that creates epigenetic impact on your brain and your physiology to create symptoms and to awaken your intuition to try to let you know, hey, you're off balance and you're eccentric, not eccentric. And then your people around you, if you get cocky, they humble you with criticism. If you get down, they lift you up. They're trying to get you in the center sociologically.
Back to
And if you're
homeostasis.
really cocky, you attract tragedies to humble you. If you get really humble, you get comedies to lift you. Nature is trying to get you there. It's almost like a panpsychic intelligence. The universe is trying to get people authentically empowered.
Yeah.
And the moment you get aware of that and see everything is on the way for that objective, you're grazed, you're inspired, you're creative, you wake up your genius and you contribute the difference, and you actually love solving problems, because the greater the problems you solve, the greater the fulfillment you have. Why fulfillment? Because the more the polarizations and the more you're too proud or too humble to admit what you see in them inside you, the more voids you have that want fulfillment. So that's why your highest value, where you're most objective, neutralizes all the polarities and judgments. And when you're doing something you really love and inspired by in a day, you have the most resiliency and adaptability because you're more neutral and don't feel the loss or gain of things. You're just present. And in that powered state, that's where you actually make the greatest contribution and love solving problems to give you fulfillment.
I love that. Thank you so much, because that was going to be one of my questions today, is the pursuit of happiness versus the pursuit of fulfillment. And you've just laid it out there in terms of this is why fulfillment is so much more intrinsically valuable, and it is the pursuit of fulfillment.
Freud said that we have the pleasure, hedonistic pleasure pursuit. We have the power pursuit, and we have meaning. And the distinction between ourselves and the animals is the meaning. And guess what the mean is? The mean is the mean between the polarities of perception. That goes all the way back to Aristotle. Aristotle and the Stoics around that time understood this. And so it's finding meaning is being able to intuitively extract the downsides to the upsides and the upsides to the downsides. When you are infatuated with somebody, your intuition is trying to point to downsides to give meaning to why this is happening. And if you're resentful to something, that's trying to give you the upsides to get you meaning and purpose too. Nature's attempting to give you meaning out of experience. Camus said there is no meaning in the universe other than what human beings give. That's true. But there's still the ability to extract meaning out of every event in your life and find the mean and keep in the Fibonacci progression towards the sun, as Pythagoras would say, the path of enlightenment.
I love that. So one of the things that I have heard you say, and this has been true and truer for me, is oftentimes we have this conversation around confidence. And I've come to believe that actually confidence is a complete bullshit facade. And for me, it's really empowering when I tune into your work and then I find like something that I'm trying to distill, and I find, oh, John's already made a mention to this somewhere along the way. And for me, it's a byproduct of clarity. And we're just talking about uncertainty here, and you're talking about clarity. Does that kind of sound about right to you?
When we're authentic, we have certainty. When we're inauthentic, we're designed to have uncertainty to get us back as a feedback loop, to get us back into our authentic self. So the imposter syndrome is a normal byproduct of judgment. The moment you exaggerate yourself and look down on people and try to get them to live in your values and throw projections of imperatives on them, you should, you ought to, you're supposed to, you got to, you have to, you must live according to what I say. Or you minimize yourself and put people on pedestals and inject their values and try to live in their values, the shoulds and ought tos of theirs. Those uncertainties of shame or pride are automatically designed not to be certain because they're not you. But the moment you're you and you're in a state of grace and you're present, because a perfectly equilibrated mind of equanimity and objectivity opens the heart, and you feel graced and you feel love for your life and for the universe around you. And you're inspired and you're present, and therefore you're certain. And there is actually a state of certainty. In my Breakthrough Experience program, where I teach some of these principles and help people master their lives and break through what these illusions that they're holding on to, the mythologies and the things that create the pathologies in their life. The pathology is a byproduct of not knowing the path of your own logos, your own reason. And so when the person is able to break through that and get a glimpse of that, they can have certainty. And I show them how to have that state of certainty where there's an unwavering certainty moment. It's only in the moment of certainty that you have evolution. When you have uncertainty, you have revolution. Because anything you infatuate or resent keeps reverberating in your mind. The Buddhists call that samsara, the wheel of 84. But the Dharmic path was the path where you had objectivity and certainty, where you knew your path, you knew yourself. When it says know thyself, be thyself, love thyself, it's true. Your highest value is your identity revolves around. And if you live congruently by priority according to that, you actually get to know yourself. Because that's where you're most objective and equanimous.
I love that. Thank you so much for clarifying that for us. So tuning back into your story, and one of the things that I wanted to dive into is intuition, because you've mentioned it just then as well, and also, you know, there was this intuitive voice that you, like when you tuned in, you saw this vision of yourself speaking to people. You had this intuition that, you know, you wanted to serve and to, you know, speak, research, and so from there, how does, like, what is the, in your humble opinion, where does the intuition come from, and how do we actually access that for the average listener?
Okay. Impulse is a desire and yearning for the prey. Instinct is a desire to avoid the predator. And they are a positive feedback system which dramatizes and polarizes towards false positives to make sure you don't get eaten and that you eat. Intuition is a neutralizing negative feedback system, trying to find the downsides in the prey to calm down your impulse, and the upsides to the predator so you can calm down your instinct. So you can be present, because if you're present and you're still, you actually draw the animal to you, and the other one doesn't bite. Yogis or great mystics understood this. So the person who is able to be centered and present can interact with the animals and not fear the predator. There are people that can go out and be with tigers and lions and be friends with them, as you know. And they know how to be centered. The second they have an instinct from it, it has a tendency to go after it.
Right.
Same thing for an impulse. If you got an impulse and you're afraid you're going to starve or something like that, you don't have the ability to conquer that leptin and ghrelin impulse. It runs. It can sense it. Otherwise, it just feels like a friend to you. You know, it's the old story of Tarzan, if you will. Tarzan could interact with the predators and the prey. And so in the second you're centered, you don't have this impulse and instinct. And intuition is the negative feedback system to try to homeostate you back into equilibrium. So imagine a thermostat or a governor of a motor. If it gets hot, it cools it down. If it gets cold, it warms it up. That's a thermostat. That's a negative feedback loop bringing homeostasis. Stasis means the forces of nature are balanced. And homeostasis, or at least allostasis, which is a moving balance, is what most human beings live with. But the second we go into dramatization, where we polarize it, and we get emotional, and we get out of control, that's the positive feedback loop of impulse and instinct. And people that don't have governance over their impulse and instincts live with passion of an animal. And those that know how to govern themselves with their intuition live with a mission as an angelical human, an enlightened path of a human. Light doesn't have polarity. It's spaceless, timeless, massless, and chargeless. But particles and antiparticles have polarity. And when they're separated in space and time by polarizations of the mind, they're entangled. So intuition is an entangling force inside the mind, trying to show the realization that these are actually inseparable in the mind. There is no separation of positive and negatives. Those are the illusions of the conscious and unconscious splits because of judgment. Empedocles said in the 5th century, very clearly, 6th century almost, about his world on the 4 elements that Aristotle referred to. He said that there was a love and strife in the universe. Strife is when you dissemble and disassociate the polarities, and love is when you integrate the polarities. And so true love is the synthesis and synchronicity of all compromising opposites. And impulse and instinct occurs when we separate the inseparables, divide the indivisibles, label the unlabellables, name the ineffitables, and polarize the unpolarizables. We magnetize into polarities instead of actually demagnetize into love.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So in that same sort of neutralizing effect, is that kind of the space that gratitude also sits in then as well? And that's why it's so powerful.
A perfectly equilibrated mind is grace. See, there's 2 types of gratitude. There's a superficial gratitude that the mass consciousness lives in, that thank you for giving me something. I think I've got something. It seems like a gift. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And when things go your way and support you, go, thank you, thank you. When things go away, you go, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, if you choose the expression.
Yep.
And future understanding of conscious knowledge, right? Youthful organized understanding. That's a sacred acronym I just used. But what happens is when all of a sudden you realize that that form of thankfulness is superficial. There's a deep one. When you realize that there's a challenging going on and a support, and you see the hidden order of both of them synchronously. And when you see them synchronously, there's a poised grace. And you realize, by God, there's an intelligence in the universe, a panpsychic presence that's making sure that I'm getting both sides at once to maximize my growth. Because it's biologically been proven that maximum growth and development occurs at the border of support and challenge, prey and predator, positive and negative. Erwin Schrödinger wrote a book in 1944 called What is Life? Fantastic book, Nobel Prize winning classic book. And he showed that life evolves by quantum leaps. And him and Dirac, who took particle and nanoparticles, which is partly what gave us rise to particle accelerators today, that Brown put together. If you take positive and negatives and you integrate those two, you make light. And so too, if you take the positive and negatives of human behavior, psychology, and put them together synchronously, you have enlightenment. And that is grace. And that's a state of gratitude that I in the breakthrough experience that I do almost every weekend, I just finished last night, I make sure that everybody who attends there does not stop in their realization until they get that synthesis and synchronicity of complementary opposites. They have equanimity and they have objectivity and they get to know what it's like to be in their telos, their highest value, their real present state, where they got their magnetism, their power. And all of a sudden, when they do that, they realize what grace really means. Because that grace occurs when you have no desire to change others relative to you with pride, and there's no desire to change you relative to others with shame. There's simply a love for somebody and realization that there is a reflective awareness. The seer, the seeing, and the seen are the same, and there's nothing to fix. There's a poised state where there's awe, where human will matches divine will, when predestination and free will are joined, when there's no paradox to ask a question, there's a state of knowing. And that state is grace. And that is what I'm talking about when I talk about real gratitude, deep gratitude. Just like the difference of infatuation and agape love, same kind of thing. Or the difference between excitement and enthusiasm. They're not the same. People confuse the two. Or passion and mission. Passion means to suffer. Mission is a grace state of a calling to a mission. Totally different babies.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think a lot of what we've been talking about has been culminating to this question that has emerged for me in this episode, which is, so we talk a lot about how everything is kind of bringing us to this natural homeostasis, which seems to be this call to balance, which is consistently occurring. But then there's also this impetus to grow, and just the mind would not intuitively, but the mind kind of sees these as perhaps two different pursuits. The pursuit for balance does not necessarily sound like the pursuit for growth, but it seems like achieving balance is growth. Can you shed some light on what's going on there?
It's been a paradox many students have asked me. The moment you have a polarization and you have uncertainty, you have a quest inside you, innate quest for homeostasis, electronically, molecularly, and in your own psychology. This perturbation that we feel when we're unstable and we have volatilities and we have an ungoverned state makes us have an intuitive quest to find how to solve these problems, this instability, this perturbation. And it's mainly because we're extrinsically driven. When we live by our highest values, we're intrinsically called. When we live by our lower values, we're extrinsically driven, motivated. Punishment, reward thinking. So the second we have this perturbation, we have this quest for knowing. When we actually equilibrate it, we get to know. If we're infatuated with something, we don't know it because we're unconscious of its downsides. When we're resentful to something, we don't know it. We're unconscious of its upside. When we're in love with something, we know it. In that moment of love and equanimity, we know something. In that moment, we do what is called a quantum leap, a spaceless, timeless quantum leap. That's called evolution. The moment we do, we then start the next judgment, the next mystery, the next problem, next unknown. Now that evolutionary process is the next unknown. But the second we do that, we undergo a revolution, because anything we infatuate with or resent in our minds occupies space and time in our minds and keeps us running around with all this noise in the brain And we have stagnation until we integrate. The second we integrate, we make another quantum leap, we make another evolutionary jump. That's why Schrodinger in his book showed that all evolvement occurs by quantum leaps. And quantum leaps are the synthesis, not the polarities. So the growth process, but once we do, we start our next illusion. And the next illusion is the assumption that we're going to get an advantage over a disadvantage on this next pursuit. And then we set up a next fantasy. But as we go through the fantasy and pursue the fantasy, we discover, God almighty, if I'd have known all the crap I'm going to go through in order to get. But the difference between a fantasy and an objective, the gradations of goals in between, is an objective knows there's both sides and foresights them with its imagination, anticipates them, mitigates the risk, comes up with a solution in advance so they act, not react. They're preparing with foresight instead of living the lowest heuristically by hindsight, by telenomics and trial and error. So by going through and doing that, they are anticipating that. And the one who can do that most effectively and the most objectively makes the next quantum jump, and they evolve at a maximum efficiency. And the individual who can stay objective keeps evolving. The person who keeps getting caught in its next polarity can stagnate and get caught in revolutions, not evolutions.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think for me, the intention of the conversation I wanted to have with you today was focused around self-mastery. And I think that's kind of the trajectory of like the underlying thread of everything in terms of balance, equanimity, and growth. I think there's so much in there. Every time I have you on, I feel like, damn it, it was too short. I wish I could have got more time with you. So I would love to jump on with you again. But I think the key thing for me, and thank you so much for sharing your story and the insights that have woven out from there, because I think the context is so important for us when we're trying to learn. And just to reflect back to you, just the context with which you provide the level of self-mastery, the curiosity, the learnings that you've undertaken on yourself in order to then be able to teach and share that, and just the through lines that you find again and again and you share with such grace is such a blessing to receive and behold. So I just want to really thank you for your time and energy here today, John.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I love doing what I do. So thank you for the opportunity to give me the opportunity to share it. Hopefully this will, when they listen to this, if they probably will have to review it a few times. That's not uncommon, and because I speak a bit fast sometimes. But I feel certain that the content that we got to share today will be of value to people if they pursue it and take it in.
Absolutely. It's changing my life. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. For those that want to get in touch with John, the best place to find your work online, obviously the website is filled with resources. I direct a lot of my clients, a lot of people just to go get the values exercise done. It's an amazing free resource that John has provided on his website. Is that the best place for people to get in touch?
Yeah, if they go on to drdemartini.com, DRDEMARTINI.com, they can get access to, there's hundreds and hundreds of interviews. There's tons of YouTubes. It's an educational resource you could probably spend the rest of your life on and not run out of time. It's got that much material on it.
And I can totally attest to that. For me, yeah, I spend a lot of downtime researching, learning myself, and even just the amount of content that's available from John on YouTube. I love the watchable experience. It's incredible. So really, thank you so much for all the work that you put into that place. We'll put all the links to everything in the show notes. And John, as always, wishing you all the best on the journey ahead. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, and vice versa. And thank you for all the things you're doing and great questions. I appreciate them.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Love of the Inspired Evolution and sharing the Love of the Inspired Evolution. If you feel like this content has supported you or may support anyone else that you know may resonate with the content of it, please share away and share the love around. Thank you guys so much. And to stay up to date on whatever's coming out with the Inspired Evolution, please subscribe. There's all these links in the bio for you to tune into the episodes and all these different platforms, just so that message can get to you and your loved ones. Thank you so much for all your love and support. Stay inspired to evolve.